All right, welcome back. This is lecture 5 on light from chapter 7, talking about color. So real quick, I just want to introduce you to the color wavelengths. We saw this a little bit when we talked about the electromagnetic spectrum. So you'll see here there is a table. I'm not asking you to memorize the table. I'm not asking you to use these numbers because if you look, these numbers have exponents, so these numbers either get very small or these numbers get very big. Also, you'll see that there's a formula over here. Not asking you to be able to use the formula because we're talking about very big numbers. Remember, the speed of light, much bigger than the speed of sound, because this is actually the same equation if you think about it. Because we had wavelength and frequency before, but we're talking about it in a much bigger set of numbers now. Just wanted to show you that we've got the same sort of property here. So what we've got as far as color wavelengths, you're probably familiar with the colors red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. You'll notice that indigo is missing. And that is because with light, we generally don't actually talk about indigo. So red has got the longest wavelengths and the lowest energy. So you can see it's got the longest wavelengths out of these guys, and it's got the lowest frequency, which the frequency for light is tied to energy, just like with sound. So low energy compared to the other colors. And violet, on the other hand, it's on the other end of the spectrum. It's going to have the shortest wavelength comparatively and the highest energy because it has the highest frequency. So there's our Roy G. Biv. No Biv because of the missing indigo. All right, so one of the things that we need to talk about before we get into talking about how color works is how we perceive it. So you can see over here we've got the structure of our human eye. We know that light is going to come in through our eye and it's going to hit the back part right here. So we've zoomed in. I'm not going to ask you to know all of these different pieces and parts. I actually have this in here so that we can take a look at two structures. So one is the cones, because humans can detect color due to these cells called cones. If you look, you can see them right here. There's 3 of them. We've got red, blue, and green. So we've got 3 types. They're spaced out all across our eyes. And these cones are what allow us to detect color. We can only detect red, green, and blue. So you might be wondering to yourself, well, if we can only detect red, green, and blue, then how am I seeing orange or purple? And we'll talk about that here in a minute, but basically what you're going to be able to do is combine the colors, kind of like how you combine paints, but it doesn't work quite the same way with light. And then the other type of cell that we have in our eyes you may have heard of before, which are rods. And rods follow their name, just like cones have the little pointy part, rods look like sticks. And rods are mainly used in low light. These are what we use to detect light. And your rods will work pretty much all the time. If you've ever been in a dark room, you may have noticed that everything looks like it's in shades of gray and black, and this is because your rods will work in those very low light situations, but your cones won't. Your cones need a decent amount of light in order to fire up and be able to help you detect color. All right, so let's talk about how color works. So color for light is a little weird because we're used to thinking about color related to paint. So keep that in mind. So white light is a combination of frequencies of light. And usually when we think about this, we think, oh, well, to make white light, we need all the frequencies of light. We need Roy G. Biv. We need all of them. But we actually only need red, blue, and green. And that's because we can only detect red, blue, and green. So those three together will make white light, and that's what they've done here. They're showing you we've got red, blue, and green, and when we overlap them, we get different combinations of these lights. All three of them together are going to get us white light. If we add these three colors together, we get what we call the additive primary colors. So if we add red and blue together, right here you can see where they overlap, we get magenta, or this like dark pink color. And I know you're thinking, wait a minute, no, when I add red and blue together, I get purple. Yeah, so again, it doesn't work like a paint. So light is, again, those frequencies, those photons interacting with each other, those electromagnetic waves, and so they're going to work a little differently. So instead of getting purple, we get this magenta, this dark pink color. If we add red and green together, this one's really weird, we get yellow. So you add red and green together, you get like brown. And then the last one, we add green and blue together, and instead of blue-green, we get cyan, or this light blue color. So this is how we can start to get different colors. If you actually alter the strength of the different color, or the different lights, that will actually alter the colors. So that's how you can start to get orange and purples and all of the other colors that we're used to seeing. And so this is actually how like your computer screen works that you're looking at, or your cell phone or your television. They're all actually made up of what you're seeing down here. These little boxes each contain, this one's a TV screen, this one's a computer screen, these are screens like cell phones. They're actually, if you have a pocket microscope, I'm sure you all have one at home, right? But if you had one, you could set it on your computer screen or on your cell phone, and you can actually zoom in and see these little dots and dashes on your computer screen. And it's these dots and dashes turning on and off and turning on and off at different strengths that make the different colors that we see on our screens. So we can make those additive primary colors, and then each of those primary colors, the primary colors are these guys, the ones we started with, red, blue, and green. They each have an opposite. And the opposites are actually, when you set it up like this, it's going to be the color directly opposite of it. I know, right? So green's opposite is magenta, because it's straight across from the green. So red's opposite is the cyan, and blue's opposite is yellow. So what? Why do we care about the opposites? This is why. Just like if we add all three of these together, we get white light. If you add the opposite to any primary color, you get white light as well. So if you take green and you add it to magenta, you get white. If you take blue and add it to yellow, you get white light, which is kind of weird if you think about it, because that shouldn't work. But the frequencies cancel each other out, which is how this is working. Okay, so on to selective reflection. So this is tied to the property of reflection we talked about earlier, but it's here because it's about color. So most objects don't emit light. Remember, we started off talking about luminous objects or incandescent objects, ones that actually make their own light. But most objects are just reflecting light. So the light that we have is usually white light, right? The light from our light bulbs and so forth. And so that light that hits it, again, remember, most of it might be absorbed by the object, but the rest of it's going to get reflected. And so selective reflection is related to what's going to get reflected. Then this is what's going to make it its color. So, for example, a red object is going to appear red because it reflects the red wavelengths back to us. So that's like our little ladybug friend down here. All of the colors are coming in. So this is white light. All of them are coming in, going to hit the ladybug shell. And then all of the colors except for the red are going to get absorbed, and that red is going to bounce off the shell and go into our eyes. And so that's why it's going to look red. So if you have a green shirt, it's going to look green because it absorbs all of the other wavelengths except green, and that's going to get reflected. This is why something that looks black gets hot, because black material is actually going to absorb all of those wavelengths and not reflect any of them back, or reflect very little of them back. And so it's going to convert it all to heat instead of reflecting it away. So then what happens if we change the wavelengths of light present? Because like I said, most of the time we're talking about white light. So does it change anything? Well, let me scoot myself up out of the way, because that's what these pictures are down here. So if we take a look at this picture right here, this is a picture of the playing card with the 3 of hearts, some grapes, and a bell pepper, because why not? So this is in white light. So we've got this guy in white light, and then it's the same objects in these other pictures, but when they exposed them in these other pictures, they exposed it under different wavelengths of light, just single wavelengths. And so in the second picture here, you might be able to guess what color they exposed it under. And if you guessed red, you're correct. So you can see there's very little reflecting off of the bell pepper, more reflecting off of the grapes, which we would expect. And the card is just completely lit up red. And that makes sense if you think about what color the card was originally, because the card originally was, white. So the card was white. It's going to just reflect back whatever wavelength we shine on it. So then where did the numbers and hearts go? Well, what color were they reflecting over here? Yeah, they were reflecting red. Since they were reflecting red over here, all we gave it to reflect over here is red. So they're still reflecting red, but that's all there is to reflect off of the whole card. And so they disappear. If you look over here, now we're using green. The card has turned green, because again, the card was white over here, so now it's turned green. The numbers have come back, but if you look at what color they are, they're now black, because they have no green to reflect back. So that's why we can see them now. And then we've got a little bit on the grapes and a whole lot on the bell pepper reflecting back. And then our last one, I bet you can guess, is blue because of the card, but then you've got a lot of blue on the grapes and just a little bit on the bell pepper. So that's selective reflection. And selective reflection is actually tied to not just the single wavelengths, but the type of light that you're seeing things in. So why do objects look different inside than they do outside? Well, it has to do with the frequency distribution. So I don't know if any of you have experienced this. You've put on something when you're inside and it looks one color. You go outside and it looks completely different. Well, this is because sunlight is this one in the back. This is the wavelength distribution for sunlight. You can see lots of all the different wavelengths. But our lights that we use inside, these are LEDs, incandescents, and CFLs. Those are the pigtail bulbs or fluorescent bulbs. You can see that the frequencies are very different. And so there's a lot of red, but very little blue for incandescent, lots of blue and lots of orange and yellow, but not much of the red and green for LED, and then all kinds of spikes for the fluorescent. So this is why you get different colors for inside and outside.